Hello everyone! Tonight's video contains 5 terrifying true horror stories about the Goatman, Skinwalkers, and the Dogman. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and don't forget to subscribe. Also tell me in the comments, what time are you watching this video? Now, let the horror begin. I was told to post this here by a friend as he said my story sounded similar to some urban legend about Skinwalker's Goatman. I've never heard of it before, but I Googled it and saw lots of stories and videos about it and something about some farm in Utah in America. Anyway, some background. I'm 28 years old and I live in Kent in England. Ever since a kid, I've always had this weird obsession about the States, traveling through the States and generally seeing lots of sights. I'm not a city guy, far from it. My parents are both farmers and I like the outdoors a lot. I joined a rock climbing club when I was in my teens and met 2 good friends, James and Grant, who came on the trip with me in 2012. I had always planned to go the States, Colorado to be specific because of the forests and the mountains. We all agreed to go, saved for a year, and off we went. We were in Denver, which by the way is a great city, and later we traveled south down Highway 87, through Colorado Springs, down to Walsenburg, and then headed west and ended up in a very small town after about 4 or 5 hours, somewhere close to the New Mexico border. We had actually got there due to meeting some friends in Denver, who were keen explorers like ourselves, and they asked if we wanted to join them on a road trip or camping trip, so we did. There were 5 of them: Chris, another James, Richard, Melissa, and Lucy, and us 3, myself, James, and Grant. The first 2 nights were great. Chris and Richard liked to hunt and had brought alone their rifles with them, and they taught us a few things about shooting and whatnot. On the 3rd night, all 8 of us went on a little walk through the forest, having a look around and taking all the amazing views in. The girls, Lucy and Melissa, wanted to head back to the cabin to start cooking the dinner for us, and Richard went back with them. So Chris, the 2 Jameses, Grant, and I roamed around. Up ahead on the trail, I point out to Chris I saw what looked like a deer, but as quick as I could grab their attention and turned back around, it was gone. I'd probably made way too much noise, to be honest, and scared it off. But a few minutes later I saw it again. It was a little weird though. It looked a little darker than a deer and had more fur. It didn't look right at all. It was like a man on all 4s or something and just didn't seem to move very smoothly. I must have been so focused on this deer that I was completely oblivious to the smell that surrounded us that Grant pointed out. It smelt like death or blood, but it felt warm and metallic. It was horrible. I asked Chris if there was some kind of factory nearby, but he said there wasn't really anything like that for miles. I really did smell. It was stomach-turning, and I have a strong stomach from living on a farm for my whole life. We turned back anyway to head back to the cabin to meet the others. We walked for about 10 minutes when I saw what looked like the same deer in the distance to my right, and I swear to God it stood up on its hind legs. I called Chris at the front and said to the others to look to the right, and they did. James laughed and said it looks like a guy, and Grant suggested it was another group of people out walking as well. But I told them it stood up and that it was the deer from earlier I tried to get them to look at. I was adamant about it, but they looked at me like I was stupid, as it was definitely a figure of a person with his back to us. Chris called out at it and there was no reply. He called again and nothing. Then we all shouted out, "Are you okay over there?" The reply was subtle but loud enough to be heard, "It's Richard." We all looked at each other confused because he was supposed to be with the girls. He called out again, "It's Richard," and it definitely sounded like him. Chris told him to stop fucking around and we carried on walking, and I looked back after no more than 5-10 seconds and he was gone. Completely. That was no way enough time to just disappear without seeing him run off. We got back to the cabin eventually. Lucy and Melissa were in the kitchen making dinner and Richard was chilling with them. Chris told Richard to not leave the girls again, as he was the only one with them and it wasn't safe to leave them alone due to wild animals. But Richard said he'd been here the whole time with them. Confusing. Chris, Grant, the 2 James, and I looked at each other and laughed, telling him we saw him in the woods with us and you said, "It's Richard," when we shouted at him. But he looked us with a dead straight face. "Seriously, guys, I was here the whole time," and the girls confirmed it. We all just shrugged it off. The 3 of them were in on the joke. They got us. I managed to wake up around 3 a.m. dead thirsty and needed a drink, and that rank smell was back. The smell probably woke me up, to be honest. I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water and I could hear rustling from outside. It wasn't like someone was walking, but it sounded like someone was crawling around. I turned on the outside light, which didn't do much at all, but about 20 meters away at the edge of the forest, I saw another figure. It was very dark outside, and I'm sure I was just seeing things, but the figure was like yesterday, just there, motionless. A black-figured silhouette with its back turned towards me. I was freaking out. I went back to the bedrooms and woke up the boys. They weren't really 100% awake yet. Probably pissed off I'd woken them up, but when I showed them what I was looking at, they soon came around. James opened the cabin door, which was facing where the person was, to get a better view, and we all huddled around the door entrance to see also. Chris had a huge maglite torch on him and just shone it at the figure, and it didn't move. Grant shouted out in a typical British way, "Oi, you cunt," which made us laugh, but the figure didn't move. We were pretty alarmed by this point, and we decided to go back inside, and as we turned around to go back in, we heard, "It's Richard." We all just looked at each other, and we all looked at Richard, and chaos ensued. I and the others had no idea what the hell to do. Richard wasn't, to my knowledge, a guy that could throw his voice, but the voice was his, and Richard did not speak. We waited for what seemed like a lifetime for the sun to come up. Constantly checking outside, Richard and Chris's rifles never left their hands. We grabbed the girls and just left as fast as we could. Sorry, I know there isn't much of a spectacular ending, but I wanted to at least share what we saw. It was Chris who told me to post here. He's a user of Reddit, and I'm sure he will be here shortly. I hope this makes some kind of sense. My wife and I just recently welcomed my sweet daughter into this world, but I've got a bad feeling she may not be as sweet as she seems to be to. But to understand why I'd say that about my own daughter, I need to give a little back story to the situation. We haven't been married very long, as it's not really frowned upon to marry soon in my family. But when we were first dating and staying with my parents, we slept in their living room. And when we woke up one morning, I noticed the door was still unlocked. But I was always sure to keep it locked. I never really noticed anything else, though. I never saw any handprints on the door or windows. I never saw anything out of the ordinary at all that would be a telltale sign of an intruder. I brought it up to my dad, so he took me to his office to check the CCTV monitor. No one had approached the house all night. In fact, everything was eerily still except for a very large cat that would always hang out in their yard. That cat had been around for a long time, though. We always thought maybe it was a neighbor's cat because we lived out in the backcountry of Texas, and there were other people out in the woods. But growing up there, I did actually notice a lot of things that scared the shit out of me. I once saw my cat, Salem, shape-shifting right in front of my eyes when my little cousin and I were playing soldiers near the woods. One of the old men down the road would tell us stories of a panther that would kill people's horses, but I wondered if it was really my shape-shifting cat or something. My dad also told me a story of a man that lived on our land before we did that killed his daughter's bus driver for what she said he did to her one day when she came home crying, and he would see the ghost of that dad standing over him when he slept with a blood-stained shirt and evil radiating from his eyes. And of course countless other stories of all sorts of things that go bump in the night. None of that really seemed related to that night I noticed the door was unlocked. However, since then, I've noticed a lot of things are different about her than she used to be, but nothing too extreme, just minor things. Things that only people really close to her would know, like she started wearing makeup when she never really liked it before, and what she liked to eat changed. But I didn't really know how to explain it. I had only known her a few months and only had to ask what she liked to eat so few times for dates and family gatherings. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, or ask her if something was wrong, she shot it down. So I just had to deal with the fact that maybe I was just discovering her for who she really is. I got used to it. It wasn't a big deal after all. Like I said, it wasn't anything major. And she still seemed like the girl I loved. And like I said, we had only been dating for a few months at the time. She also started calling me Delicious, which wasn't really a pet name we had used before. I tried to ignore how uncomfortable her tone was when she used it. It was probably just sexual anyway. More recently, I've noticed odd smells originating from under our house when I'm out working around the yard. I've also noticed a greater number of flies and carrion birds. I was hoping a lost dog or some large rodent had just crawled under there and died. But one day I found the promise ring I had given her that she said she lost before we even moved to this house. It looked extremely old now and caked with mud. I started nosing under the house near where the ring was laying, and I found a large indentation on the earth as if something was laying there but had been moved. Soon after that day, she surprised me with the news that we were going to be parents, and I'd been so excited at first until I realized something. I just knew my initial suspicions were proven true when she got pregnant. You see, my wife warned me right away not to expect children because of an accident she had when she was small. She was infertile. Growing up among the rolling green hills of Vermont meant that I spent a lot of time outdoors. Even though I lived in the capital city of Montpellier, my choice of activities had always been camping, hiking, and swimming. Most of my outdoors memories are happy, but there was one experience I had that made me almost never go camping again. My cousin Corey and I were on summer vacation from high school, and we begged my mom to take us to our favorite campground for a few days. The next afternoon, we arrived at Lake Elmore State Park, where a ranger gave us a map with available sites circled on it, and we quickly picked on and settled in. Our first night was uneventful. Since it was the middle of the week, the park was almost deserted, which meant that Corey and I never had to wait for paddle boats to become available, and we got prime lake beach spots without having to get there early in the morning. The trip was perfect until the second night. My mom wanted to go home on the second day to check on my brother Nate, who hadn't wanted to come with us, so after dinner she left. We knew she wouldn't be back until around midnight, so we entertained ourselves by making s'mores and playing card games. After a while, we got restless and decided to walk down to the lake. From the bulk of the sites, the lake is about a 10-minute walk, and Mount Elmore, which rises above the lake, is always beautiful at sunset. We made it down to the lakeshore just fine, and we enjoyed the cool sensation of wet sand squishing between our toes as we built a sand castle. The sun was beginning to set in earnest, and we hadn't brought a lantern down with us, so we headed back to the site to grab one. I was eager to head back to the lake, but Corey suggested that we walk the trail that goes to the old fire tower at the top of Mount Elmore instead. I agreed, and we made our way to the outskirts of the campground where the trail started. An hour or so went by as we walked and talked, just enjoying the refreshing night air. The lantern gave us enough light that we didn't feel nervous, and we made sure not to go off the trail. There was only one path for most of the trek, so it was easy to follow. At one point, a herd of deer came bounding out of the woods near us, their appearance so sudden that I nearly dropped the lantern. Corey, now a bit spooked, asked if we could head back to camp. I wasn't really ready to, but I wanted him to be comfortable, so I agreed. We had been walking back towards the trailhead for about 5 minutes when we heard someone in the woods off to our right. It was clearly a person, since their rhythmic footsteps had a 1-2 pattern. It wasn't unusual for rangers to patrol the trails even at night, and if one of them had seen us, they were probably checking to make sure we weren't doing anything illegal or destructive. We waited for them to appear, but the steps had stopped and no one entered the circle of light we were in. After a minute, Corey asked who was there, his voice quivering slightly. I thought it was a little odd that we couldn't see a flashlight by then, but I shrugged it off and kept walking. If some weirdo wanted to be creeping around in the woods at 10 p.m. without a light, then that was their business, not mine. It was probably someone sneaking away from their family to smoke or drink, which could easily explain why they weren't coming forward or greeting us if they thought we would report them. As we walked, I noticed that since the appearance of the deer, the woods had seemed oddly silent. I can admit that by then I was glad that we were heading back to camp. We were about halfway down the trail when a voice called out to us, which we instantly recognized as my mom's. The sound had come from behind us, though, and Corey and I spun around in unison. I shouted out a confused-sounding greeting, but got no response. Corey looked at me, concern clear on his face. It made sense that it had been my mom in the woods, since she was probably trying to get us back for all of the pranks we had pulled over the years. Even so, it was a bit unnerving that she suddenly wasn't responding after just having called to us, and she wasn't known for dragging pranks out. We waited for several minutes, occasionally calling out to her. I started to get mad, because by then the situation wasn't funny anymore and I was becoming worried. A few more minutes went by and I was finally fed up. I grabbed Corey by the elbow and began to march back to camp, grumbling about annoying mothers and stupid pranks. Corey hadn't said a word, but I noticed him watching the woods around us carefully. As we reached the last 10-minute stretch of the trail, my mother's voice once again rang out behind us. It sounded wrong this time, and I immediately thought she might be hurt. I spun around, the swinging lantern casting distorted shadows. I couldn't see anything but trees, and I didn't hear anyone moving around. I was slowly becoming scared, and I just wanted to get back to the safety of the campfire. My attention was drawn to the lantern light reflecting off of something in a bush nearby. It was a pair of eyes, but to my confusion they were about 7 feet off the ground. No animal around here could be standing that tall, even on back legs. What the hell? Corey echoed my confusion. We were both staring at this towering shadow, neither of us daring to move. After a moment it stepped towards us, and our feeble hope that it was just a deer on its back legs was smashed. To this day we still don't know exactly what we saw, but the word Goatman is the best way I have of describing it. A pair of woolly legs and a fuzzy abdomen gave way to smooth humanoid chest and arms. The face was horrifying, a mix of goat and man that still haunts me. I watched as it opened its mouth, my mother's voice coming charily from it, but the sound was warped and too deep. "Hi, baby girl. Good morning, Lonnie." To this day I don't remember getting back to the campsite. I remember screaming and running as fast as I could away from the creature, but that's it. I don't know if it followed us or tried to communicate further, and I'm not sure that I want to know. We never did tell my mom or the park rangers about our encounter. We figured that they would tell us we were crazy, or chalk our experience up to the use of recreational substances, so it wasn't worth the hassle. Corey and I have both returned to Elmore since then, but neither of us has ever seen or heard the creature. I've often wondered if we imagined the whole thing, or if it was some sort of weird dream. People don't usually share the exact same dream though, right? The sky was covered with heavy gray clouds when we arrived deep in the Catskill Mountains. Me, Jack, Ethan, and Mike had planned the trip for weeks. We wanted to get away from the city for a while. No phones, no traffic, no people. Just trees, mountains, and a quiet weekend camping in the middle of nowhere. At first, everything felt normal. We parked our truck near an abandoned dirt road and hiked into the forest for almost an hour before finding a clearing near a steep valley. The trees there were massive, taller than anything I had ever seen before. Their branches blocked most of the sunlight, making the forest feel darker long before sunset. Jack laughed as he set up his tent. "This place looks like the start of a horror movie." We all laughed with him, but the old man at the gas station before the mountain hadn't laughed at all. When we told him where we were going, the expression on his face changed immediately. He stared at us for several seconds before quietly saying, "If you hear someone calling your names at night, don't answer." Then he added, "And if you hear screaming in the woods, don't go looking for it." We thought he was just trying to scare tourists. I wish we had listened. Night came quickly in those mountains. The cold got worse after sunset, so we built a fire and sat around it eating canned food and telling stupid stories. The wind moved slowly through the trees, making the branches creak like old wooden doors. Around midnight, something changed. The forest went silent. No insects, no wind. Nothing. Ethan looked around nervously. "You guys noticed that?" Before anyone answered, we heard it. A scream. Far away at first, a woman screaming for help. We all froze instantly. The scream came again, louder this time. "Help me!" Mike stood up immediately. "There's somebody out there." But Jack grabbed his arm hard. "Sit down." I remembered the old man's warning, and suddenly the cold felt much worse. The voice cried again. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. The voice changed. Now it sounded exactly like Ethan. "Guys, over here." We slowly turned toward Ethan. He was sitting right beside us. I didn't say anything. He whispered. Then we heard footsteps moving around the campsite. Slow, heavy, circling us. Jack grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then I saw it standing between the trees about 20 yards away. It was impossibly tall. Its body was thin and pale, almost skeletal. Its arms hung too low, nearly reaching its knees. But the worst part was its face. Its eyes looked black and empty, and its mouth stretched into a horrible grin filled with sharp teeth. It smiled at us. Then it disappeared behind the trees so fast it barely looked real. Mike cursed under his breath. What the hell was that? Jack kept staring into the darkness. His voice shook when he answered. A Wendigo. Wendigo. None of us slept that night. We stayed close to the fire while strange sounds surrounded us from deep within the woods. Sometimes we heard footsteps, sometimes whispers, sometimes our own voices calling from the darkness. At around 3 a.m, Mike disappeared. One second he was sitting beside the fire, the next second he was gone. We shouted his name over and over, But there was no response. Then finally we heard him. "Guys," his voice came from somewhere deep in the trees. "Help me." Ethan started moving toward the forest, but Jack grabbed him violently. "If you go in there, you're dead." Then we heard something else. Bones cracking, followed by a wet chewing sound. Ethan started crying immediately. Jack looked completely pale. A few seconds later, the creature stepped out of the woods again, but now it looked even taller. Its mouth and chest were covered in blood. Then it spoke, in Mike's voice. "Why did you leave me?" We ran. We left everything behind and sprinted blindly through the forest. I could hear it chasing us the entire time. Sometimes behind us, sometimes beside us, sometimes above us in the trees. Ethan tripped while running downhill. When I turned back, the creature was standing over him, its back bent in ways that shouldn't have been possible, its long fingers digging into Ethan's shoulders while he screamed. Then the thing looked directly at me. I'll never forget that smile. Jack grabbed my jacket and pulled me forward. "Don't look at it." We ran until sunrise. Eventually, we reached the road and jumped into the truck. Jack drove like a madman down the mountain without saying a single word. But before we left the forest completely, I looked back one last time. It was standing between the trees, watching us, perfectly still, smiling. 3 years have passed since that night. Jack disappeared a month later. Police said he killed himself, but before he vanished, he sent me one final message. It's still following us. Sometimes, late at night, I hear Mike's voice outside my house, soft, quiet, almost friendly. "Hey, man, open the door." My wife Claire and I rented the farmhouse because we needed silence. That's the easiest way to explain it. The last 2 years had been rough on both of us. I worked too much. She barely slept anymore, and every conversation somehow turned into an argument. When she found the listing online, an old isolated farmhouse near the forests of upstate New York, she said it sounded perfect. No neighbors, no tourists, no internet. Just one quiet week away from everything. The photo showed an old white farmhouse sitting alone beside a dead cornfield, with dark forest stretching for miles behind it. According to the owner, nobody had lived there permanently in almost 20 years. Claire loved that part. I didn't. The drive took nearly 6 hours. The farther north we went, the emptier the roads became. By sunset, we were driving through endless forest with barely another car in sight. Eventually, we reached a tiny town with one gas station, one diner, and a church that looked older than the road itself. We stopped for gas before heading to the property. The old cashier noticed the address written on the paper in my hand. His smile disappeared immediately. "You staying there?" he asked. "Just for the week," I said casually. He looked toward the dark trees outside the station windows. "You hear animals at night?" he said slowly. "Ignore them." I laughed a little. "We're from the city. We'll survive a few coyotes," but he didn't laugh back. "Coyotes don't mimic people." Claire gave me a look that clearly said, "Here we go." The old man leaned closer across the counter. "If somebody calls your name from the woods after dark, don't answer. Don't even look." Then he stepped back like he regretted saying anything at all. I should have listened. We reached the farmhouse around 8 p.m. The place looked worse than the pictures. The wood siding was peeling. The porch sagged slightly on one side. Half the windows looked cloudy with age, and the barn behind the house leaned dangerously toward the trees. But the silence out there felt unreal. No traffic, no lights, nothing but forest. Claire loved it. Instantly, this is exactly what we needed. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old wood. Most of the furniture looked untouched since the 1980s. There were faded family photos still hanging on the walls, though someone had scratched the faces out of several of them. That bothered me more than I admitted. The first night was normal. Cold, quiet, peaceful. The second night wasn't. Around 1 a.m. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the house. Slow, footsteps crunching through dead leaves. First I assumed it was a deer. Then I heard them circle the house. Claire slept beside me while I listened to something walking slowly beneath our bedroom. Window, crunch, crunch, crunch. Then it stopped, right outside the wall. I held my breath. A few seconds later, I heard scratching. 3 long scratches dragged slowly across the wood beneath the window. Claire woke up immediately. "What's that?" "I don't know." We stayed frozen in bed listening, then we heard a voice outside, soft, almost impossible to hear. Claire. My blood turned cold. Claire grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. The voice sounded exactly like me. Not similar. Exact. Claire. Come outside. Neither of us moved. The voice came again from somewhere near the porch. Claire. Then silence. Eventually the footsteps moved away toward the forest. Neither of us slept again that night. The next morning, I found scratches on the outside wall beneath the bedroom. Window, they were deep, too deep for branches. Claire wanted to leave immediately. I told her it was probably someone messing with us, even while saying it. I didn't believe myself. Later that afternoon, we drove into town for groceries. At the diner, Claire asked the waitress about the farmhouse. The woman stopped wiping the table. You're staying there? We were, Claire answered carefully. The waitress looked genuinely nervous. People around here avoid that property. Why? The waitress hesitated, then quietly said one word. Wendigo. Wendigo, I rolled my eyes a little. You seriously believe that stuff? The waitress didn't smile. My grandfather saw it in 1978. Claire stared at her. What did he see? The waitress lowered her voice. He heard his brother calling him from the woods at night, but his brother was standing beside him. Nobody at the diner spoke after that. That night we packed most of our things. The snow started around midnight. Heavy snow. The kind that swallows sound. Completely. Claire wanted to leave immediately, despite the storm, but the truck wouldn't start and the battery was dead. I remember standing outside in the freezing dark, trying the ignition over and over while snow covered my jacket. That's when I noticed something near the tree line. At first I thought it was another tree, then it moved. It was standing impossibly still between the woods and the barn, tall, far too tall. Its body looked thin like stretched skin over bones. I couldn't see its face clearly yet. Then it stepped forward. The movement was wrong. Its limbs bent strangely, jerking like an animal pretending to walk like a person. I ran back inside immediately and locked the door. Claire saw my face instantly. What happened? Before I could answer, bang, something hit the side of the house, hard enough to shake the walls. Claire screamed. Another impact hit the porch outside, then silence again. We turned off every light in the house and hid. Upstairs around 2 a.m., we heard movement downstairs. Slow footsteps. Inside the house. Claire started crying quietly beside me. I whispered, "Stay here." I grabbed the fireplace poker and moved toward the bedroom. The hallway outside was completely dark, but I could hear breathing downstairs, wet breathing. Then I heard my own voice from the kitchen. "Claire?" I nearly dropped the poker. It sounded perfect, exactly like me. Then the voice laughed, not human. Laughter, too deep, too broken. I heard footsteps slowly, climbing the stairs one step at a time. The wood creaked. Beneath something heavy, Claire buried her face against my chest while we listened. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. Then came, scratching, long claws dragging slowly across the wood. A voice whispered through the door. "Let me in." Claire was shaking uncontrollably. The doorknob began turning slowly, back and forth, back and forth. Then suddenly, a loud crash exploded. Downstairs, the thing stopped moving. Immediately, we heard it sprint across the hallway at impossible speed before disappearing down the stairs. Then came another sound. Outside, howling. Not wolves, something worse, something enormous. The creature outside answered with a scream so horrible, I still hear it in nightmares. Then silence. Complete silence. We stayed locked in that room until sunrise. When morning finally came, we went downstairs carefully. The front door was wide open. Snow had blown into the house overnight, and across the floor. There were footprints, not human, too long, too thin, leading from the kitchen to the hallway, then disappearing at the bottom of the stairs. But the strangest part wasn't the footprints, it was the smell. Rotting meat. Like something dead had been standing inside that house for hours. We left immediately after the truck finally started. Neither of us spoke much during the drive home. About 20 miles from town, Claire suddenly grabbed my arm. "Stop the car." "What?" "Stop the car." I slammed the brakes. Claire pointed toward the forest beside the road. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw it standing between the trees, watching us, tall, motionless. Its eyes looked pale against the darkness of the woods, and even from that distance, I could see it smiling. We never went back. A month later, I called the property owner demanding answers. He sounded exhausted. Then he admitted something strange. "You were the fourth couple to leave early." "What happened to the others?" Long silence, then he quietly answered, "The first couple never came home." I went to visit my aunt in the mountains of West Virginia after not seeing her for years. She lived alone in an old wooden house surrounded by endless forests and steep hills, nearly an hour away from the nearest town. The place felt wrong the moment I arrived. The woods were too quiet, and even during the day, the fog never fully disappeared between the trees. The locals acted strange, too. At the gas station near the highway, an old man noticed where I was heading and asked, "You staying up near Black Hollow Road?" I nodded. His face went pale. "Don't go into those mountains after dark." That was all he said before walking away. When I finally reached my aunt's house, I immediately noticed the heavy locks on every window and door. She hugged me tightly, but she kept glancing toward the forest behind the house as if she expected something to emerge from it. That night during dinner, I joked about the locks. "You expecting bears or something?" She stopped eating. Then she quietly said, "If you hear someone calling your name from the woods at night, don't answer." I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was messing with me, but she never smiled. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom window, slow, heavy, crunching leaves. At first I thought it was a deer, but then I heard something else, a voice, "Hello." The voice sounded horribly wrong, like something pretending to sound human. Then it made a noise that froze my blood, a deep, choking bleat, like a goat trying to imitate a person screaming. I stayed completely still in bed until the footsteps finally disappeared. The next morning, I asked my aunt if someone lived nearby. Her hand started shaking slightly. "You need to stay away from the mountain trails." But curiosity got the better of me. 2 days later, while my aunt was in town buying supplies, I grabbed my backpack and decided to hike one of the old trails behind the property. The forest was incredibly dense, and the deeper I went, the darker it became. After an hour, I noticed something strange. The woods had gone silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then I found a dead deer hanging from a tree branch. Not partially eaten, hung. Its stomach had been cut open, and strange symbols were carved into the bark nearby. That was when I heard whistling. A slow, uneven whistle echoing through the trees. I turned around quickly, but there was nobody there. Still, I could feel eyes watching me. I started heading back, but after nearly an hour of walking, I realized something horrifying. I was lost. The trail was gone. Every direction looked exactly the same. Then I heard my aunt's voice somewhere ahead of me. "Nabil, over here." Relieved, I ran toward the sound through the trees until I saw a tall figure standing on a rocky hill. At first I thought it was her. Then the figure moved. It stepped forward into the moonlight, and I nearly screamed. It was over 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with long arms hanging almost to its knees. Its body was covered in dark matted fur, but its head was a goat's skull with massive twisted horns, and its eyes were human. The thing smiled at me. Not like an animal, like a person. Then it spoke again, using my aunt's exact voice. "Nabil." "Come closer." I stumbled backward in terror. That was when I heard my aunt screaming somewhere behind me. "Don't look at it." I turned instinctively toward her voice. When I looked back, the creature was gone. But suddenly I heard movement all around. Mead branches snapping heavy, footsteps circling through the darkness. Then, laughter. A horrible broken laugh mixed with goat noises. I started running. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the woods on 2 legs. Sometimes the sounds came from the left, sometimes from high up the hill, impossible fast, like it was surrounding me. Then I heard another voice. My mother's voice. My mother had died 3 years earlier. "Please help me." I stopped for 1 second. That was enough. The creature stepped out from behind a tree only 20 feet away. Under the moonlight, I could finally see its face, clearly, Rotting flesh clung to parts of the skull. Human teeth were shoved crookedly inside its jaw. Around its neck hung ropes tied with animal bones and rusted charms. Then it spoke again in my mother's voice. "Come here." I ran harder than I ever had in my life. I could hear it chasing me, screaming like an injured animal. At one point, I looked back and saw it sprinting upright between the trees, its glowing eyes locked onto me. I eventually burst out of the woods onto the dirt road near my aunt's house. She was standing outside holding an old shotgun. The moment she saw me, she dragged me inside and locked every door. Then she whispered something that still haunts me. "It saw you." Around 3 a.m., something started walking across the roof. Slow footsteps, then scratching, then knocking on the front door, and finally, my own voice from outside. "Auntie, let me in." She grabbed my arm tightly and whispered, "That's not you." The thing outside started laughing. Then it began mimicking her voice too. We stayed awake until sunrise, listening to it circle the house. The next morning, my aunt finally told me the truth. For decades, people living near those mountains had talked about a creature called the Goatman. Some believed it was once a man who disappeared during strange rituals deep in the forest. Others believed it was never human at all. But everyone agreed on one thing: if it learns your voice, it never stops following you. I left West Virginia that same day. But before I drove away, I found something waiting beside my car. A rotting goat head. And underneath it, a photograph of me sleeping in my bedroom. When I was 11 years old, my father told me a story he swore was true. It happened long before I was born, back in the late 1980s, when he and two of his friends took a hunting trip deep into the forest near Mark Twain National Forest. My father rarely talked about that trip, but whenever he did, he lowered his voice like he was afraid something might hear him. According to him, it started with a dare. One of his friends, a man named Curtis, had heard local rumors about an abandoned fire watch tower somewhere in the mountains. People in nearby towns supposedly avoided the area because hikers kept disappearing around it. Naturally, Curtis wanted to find it. My father said the drive there already felt wrong. The deeper they went into the forest, the fewer signs of civilization they saw. Eventually, the paved road turned into dirt, then gravel, then almost nothing at all. Sunset, they reached a small clearing and set up camp. That was when they noticed the first strange thing. There were no animal sounds, no birds, no insects, nothing. The woods were completely silent. Curtis joked that maybe they had scared everything away, but my father said the silence felt unnatural, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Later that night, while they sat around the fire drinking coffee, they heard something moving in the darkness beyond the trees. Heavy footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound circled the campsite slowly. One of the men shouted, "Hey, who's out there?" The footsteps stopped instantly. Then came a voice from the darkness. "Help me." It sounded like a woman crying. My father said every hair on his body stood up because the voice didn't sound right. The words were clear but emotionless, almost rehearsed. Curtis grabbed a flashlight and stood up. My father tried stopping him. "Don't go out there." But Curtis ignored him and walked toward the trees. The voice came again. "Please, help." Then they heard another sound mixed underneath it. A low animal, bleeding, like a goat. Curtis stopped walking. The flashlight beam shook in his hand as he pointed it into the darkness. And then they saw eyes, two pale eyes reflecting between the trees about 7 feet off the ground, way too high to belong to any normal animal. The thing stepped forward slightly. Father only saw parts of it at first. Long legs, patches of dark fur, huge twisted horns. Then the flashlight flickered, and the creature vanished. Not ran away. Vanished. The 3 men stayed awake the entire night, feeding wood into the fire. Every few minutes they heard movement, circling the camp, sometimes footsteps, sometimes breathing, sometimes laughter. Not human laughter, something imitating laughter. At dawn, they packed their gear immediately and decided to leave. But when they tried starting the truck, it wouldn't work. The battery was dead. All 3 men swore it had been perfectly fine the night before. That was when Curtis noticed something carved into the side of the truck. A symbol cut deeply into the metal. It looked almost like antlers. Father wanted to leave on foot immediately, but Curtis insisted the fire tower had to be nearby. Against his better judgment, my father followed him. After nearly 2 hours of hiking uphill, they found it an old rusted firewatch tower, standing above the trees. But something was wrong with it. The wooden stairs leading upward were covered in animal bones. Hundreds of them. Deer skulls, coyote, skeletons. Bird feathers hanging from ropes, and nailed to the tower itself were pieces of old clothing, children's clothing. My father said the entire place smelled like wet fur and rotting meat. Curtis still wanted to climb it. He said maybe somebody was living there. My father refused, but Curtis climbed anyway while the other two waited below. Halfway up the tower, Curtis suddenly froze. Then he shouted down, "There's somebody up here." My father looked up just in time to see a massive shape move. Behind Curtis near the top platform, Curtis screamed. The entire tower shook violently. Then something grabbed him. My father said he only saw pieces of it through the rusted beams and shadows. Black arms, a goat skull, huge horns. Curtis was dragged upward into the darkness above the platform. The screaming stopped. Instantly, for several seconds there was only silence. Then came the sound of chewing. My father and the other man ran. They sprinted blindly through the woods while something crashed through the trees behind them. At one point, my father looked back and saw it clearly. For the first time, the Goatman was taller than any man he had ever seen. Its legs bent backward like an animal's. Rotting strips of flesh hung beneath its goat skull, and human hands dangled from ropes tied around its waist. But the worst part was its eyes. They looked intelligent, like it understood exactly how terrified they were. The creature followed them for hours, not attacking, playing with them. Sometimes they heard it running beside them, sometimes ahead of them, sometimes directly behind them, whispering in Curtis's voice, "Wait for me." By nightfall, they somehow reached the road again. Their truck was still there, but Curtis was sitting in the driver's seat. At least, they thought it was Curtis. He was facing away from them, motionless. My father slowly approached the truck while calling his name. Then Curtis turned around. His throat was ripped open from ear to ear, and something moved inside his mouth. A sound came out of him. Not words, bleeding, goat-like bleeding. Then his body suddenly jerked upward like invisible strings were pulling him. My father screamed and ran for the truck door. At that exact moment, something huge landed on the roof above them. The entire truck bent under its weight. My father said he looked up through the windshield and saw the creature crawling across the roof upside down like a spider smiling. They drove away blindly while the thing slammed against the sides of the truck for nearly a mile before finally disappearing back into the forest. My father never went hunting again after that, and years later, when I was 11 and asked him if monsters were real, he stared at me for a long time before answering. Then he said something I still remember perfectly. Some things in the woods aren't animals, and they aren't people either.